I am so fortunate to be joined by Hillary Nappi right now. Hillary, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited that we're partnering up to talk about this. I might get a little geeky because this is my passion for life. So excited to be able to talk about it with you.
I'm very fortunate. We have institutional sex abuse mastermind, someone who actually does represent individuals every day, survivors of really serious abuse all throughout the United States, correct? It's not just New York.
It's not just New York. It started out, and in my small brain at the time, I thought, well, this is where I live and this is where I see a problem, and I was quickly educated. Um, there were moments in
Yeah.
my career where I step back and go, how is this so prevalent? And it only gets worse. And as our society grows and changes and we have new technologies, we just keep seeing explosions and pockets of sexual abuse everywhere. So I don't know if it's lucky for me or unlucky for me, but I get to practice in every state in the country these days. And our firm has active cases currently in 22 states. We joined the Ailstock, Wiccan, Crease, and Overhalts network about 6 months ago, but I've been in this field for about 10 years, one way or the other. So, I started my career off at a very big law firm, and I thought naively I'd be playing real life Monopoly, doing antitrust work and complex corporate work. At one point, I even thought maybe I'd do mergers and acquisitions because I studied a lot of transactional things. Um, Serendipitously, maybe, I don't know. I fell into criminal law, and the only good thing that came from that 3 years of my life was that I met my husband because I hated what I did every single day. And the better I was at my job, the worse I felt as a human being. And so I left and was at a boutique firm in Manhattan for 7 years, first as an associate, then as a partner. And I started their sexual abuse practice there. And the opportunity came to join Ailstock, Wood and Crease as an offshoot. And so all of the firm's sexual assault cases are handled by my entity in New York.
That's awesome. So you were saying you were raised in the courtroom.
Yeah, I've never had a job outside of the legal field, which is crazy and ironic. And now that I have a child looking to enter the workplace, I'm like, wow, like you should have diversity. My first job ever was as a receptionist, like assistant, I think. Like I think I just did the mail and like sorted the mail at 14. And then I kind of worked my way up. So I've had every single job in a law firm from the receptionist to the managing partner, which is very, very humbling. But it is definitely made for very interesting fodder in our office and training. And we do everything from a trauma informed perspective. And so it's easier for me sometimes to relate to the different parts of our practice, right? And, every single person in our firm adds to the client experience. And with this kind of work, you have to, right? Because the client is
Yeah.
interacting with everyone, whether it's the receptionist or the paralegal or me or one of our associate attorneys, right? We've all gone through the same trauma training because it is just a very delicate thing, and you have to be consistent with how you treat your clients in this area of the law.
I mean, you mentioned trauma informed care, trauma informed training. What is that training? What does that look like? And how has that changed your practice?
Well, not all training is equal, and I have several
Okay.
colleagues, and we've all done different things, I think. But I think there are a few fundamentals, and at least it's how we've based our practice and how I live my life. I ask almost every client, and I can't really think of one that I haven't asked, what are your goals? Right? A lot of times in this particular area of the law, people have goals that are not just monetary, right? I mean, and
Mhm.
you have to take it from the perspective of which the survivor comes to you, right? Is it a child with a parent that's hiring me? And the parent might have one goal and the child might not really be at that same point, right? They might not have processed what's happened to them or understood it. They probably don't have a context for the abuse that they've experienced. They just know that it was horrible. They didn't like it. They don't want it to continue. So that's a different conversation completely, right? Um, Adults, especially adult survivors of child sexual abuse, who there's been many, many years, right, from the incident which started their abuse or even concluded it to when they're actually hiring me, their goals could be different, right? They could want someone arrested. They could, I mean, certainly they need monetary compensation, right? I mean, therapy for any of these injuries is extremely expensive. It's hard to come by these days. Just providers are raising their costs, right? And sometimes, and most times actually, with the amount of trauma and the type of trauma suffered by these individuals, treatment ebbs and flows, right? You can have a couple of good years where you're doing well, and then suddenly something triggers you and you're not. So the goals range. Sometimes people just want to be heard. They want to be recognized for what happened to them. They want an institution to take accountability and to change. And so as a lawyer, it's, I think, my duty, right, to my clients and my obligation to meet them where they are, and give them agency and control over the decision of their case, which, I mean, look, every single client hiring a lawyer has that right? I mean, it's the client's role versus the attorney's role, but it is so much more important in these cases to explain it and to be patient and be able to use language and care and meet them where they are. I mean, so we've done lots of different things. I mean, when I represent children, we have a trauma-informed dog who's been trained through a trauma training program, who will sit with these kids when we do interviews, when we prepare them for depositions. Trying to expand that as we expand into other states. It's been great. But you know, it takes a lot of work, and it's a lot of investment from our firm and our time and our commitment to our clients. And so really grateful that we're able to do that for them.
That's a really important approach, because I mean, most of the individuals who come to us, especially the men, it could be their first time they're actually telling this story. And they didn't tell their parents, they didn't tell their friends, their coworkers, their spouses, anybody. And so you really need to have that empathy when you're speaking to them, because you're going to tell their story eventually as well. And you were mentioning the institutions, and this whole kind of conversation stemmed from a discussion and a webinar we're going to have about institutional sexual abuse. So if you don't mind, how do you hold an institution accountable? I know that's a broad question, but in general, what would make an institution accountable if the predator that assaulted the individual is not the institution? So how do you connect the dots?
Sure, you're not a defense attorney? I'm just kidding. You sue the out of them. Am I allowed to say that? You might have to edit that part out.
We can edit that if you have to.
Yeah, you know, it's...
I'll bleep it. We'll bleep it.
Yeah,
we'll
you'll have to bleep it. But, I mean, really, you have to bring a lawsuit, right? And it's so sad to say that. But we've seen this in systemic institutions across the country for decades. And, you know, the quintessential example is always the Catholic Church. Everyone talks about that. And I think that that's something that most people have as an example in their head, but it's so much more than that. You see it in schools, you see it in camps, you see it in other religious organizations, right? Hospitals, right? I mean, it's sort of any place that a person could be vulnerable. There is abuse, right? And look, it's very true of children, and I think it's easier to see in children because, let's just be honest, they are vulnerable, right? I mean, we know for a fact that people's brains don't fully develop until they're 23 years old. So taking that into account, right, you do not at 6 or 7 or 8 have a context at all for what is happening. You take the person who is in a position of power and authority, right? An older person, an adult who's supposed to help you and guide you in whatever system you're in for what they tell you. And, you know, lots of times predators use the failures of the system, which they know, to pinpoint a child who they think is going to remain quiet and who they will be able to manipulate to abuse. And so when you're talking to an adult who survived that decades ago, it's no different. And they revert back to that version of themselves. And so from a trauma-informed perspective, you have to be very patient. You have to understand how the trauma is manifesting for that individual to be able to do your due diligence as a lawyer, right? And also to effectively continue to represent them. You know, if you put a person up in a deposition who's not prepared for the amount of questions and the type and the breadth of it, especially on this subject matter, they're never going to be fulsome in their response, and then suddenly you're not making your case out, right? And so as lawyers, we put valuations on everything, which is terrible. But it's also a reality of doing this business, right? I mean, and I kind of have to tell my clients that sometimes. I have to say, look, like, this is now me slipping into the lawyer role, right? And so it's not that I feel this way, but I have to explain how it works to you. And they'll often ask, right, how much is my case worth? And when people ask me that at the first instance, I go, I'm going to do you the biggest disservice if I answer that question. I don't know enough about you yet. You haven't trusted me yet to tell me your full story, because things that they think are unrelated are going to be related to that abuse, and they're going to be part of our damage claim, right? So it is definitely something that takes time to build trust with a client. But, you know, every institution where a person can be, there's failures. I mean, the school systems are horrific, right? And we've known since at least 1972 that there were federal standards that they fail to follow. certain states have bigger issues than others. It's also, I think, impacted by socioeconomic factors, right? So there is a lot that goes into these analyses when we put them together and we look at it. And there's a reason sometimes where I'll pinpoint certain states. It's because I have data and research about numbers and disclosures, and we know. And the truth is, if there's 5 people that have disclosed, there are probably 10 that haven't, right? And so just to circle back on something you said about men, we see it all the time. I represent women, men, gay, straight, binary, non-binary, of every age, of every race, of every religion. Sex abuse and sexual assault does not know a face. And like in TV, we see people being portrayed as a certain type of character and a stereotype of what a child molester looks like. Child molesters look like you and I. Women, men, it doesn't matter, right? And I think that a lot of times the culture in which a certain person has been raised in, and like their background, it impacts the way that they process their trauma and whether they feel certain amounts of shame, and at which part of the process do they feel shame, right? So you really need to kind of understand a lot about that when you're interviewing your clients, because otherwise they won't have that trust with you. They will never be honest about the depth and breadth of their abuse, about the harm that they've suffered. So there's a lot of getting to know you with all of these clients, and I'm really proud that our team can do that, because it's a hard thing to do. And we have about, now that I've joined our firm and we've expanded, I think I have about 40 people that work for me. And so, everyone's trained the same way, and there's no judgment. And we tell them that, right? We're like, we've heard worse, we've heard less, and we're not minimizing what you've gone through. We just want you to know we're not judging you. So you have to tell us what happened. But that conversation doesn't happen in 30 minutes, and it certainly doesn't happen in one phone call.
That's what I love about you, and I love about working with you, is you actually care. Right, it's a rare breed. It's a conversation of why you've been so successful here, and why you do what you do, because you really do want to help individuals and hold the institutions accountable, like you were saying, when they turn a blind eye, and they a lot of times they know about these things happening, and they don't want accountability, or they want to keep somebody, or they want to run, put it under the rug, so to speak. And you're making sure they get.
There's always money attached to it for them, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so even when you're looking at public school districts receive federal funding per child, right? So I mean, they don't want kids to drop out of their school. And I have a case right now that I'm actively litigating where a high school teacher sexually abused, groomed, and sexually assaulted my client for 2 years. And this man built a room in the school and put a file cabinet in front of it. Then no one knew there was a room. And we know that's not true, right? That's the defense. Oh, no one knew. No one could see. How? You were supposed to be supervising that teacher. You were supposed to be supervising my client. She was a child. This was happening during the school day. Her parents did not send her to school to get raped in a classroom every day for 2 years. So, I mean, I can get really fired up about it. But when I see certain defenses, it boils my blood, literally. Someone is usually telling me to calm down, because it really pushes my buttons, right? I mean, I've been very lucky. I've had a career that has spanned, I don't even know, it feels like it's my entire lifetime, but it hasn't really been. I guess it's been about 15 years or so now. And I will tell you, I've litigated lots of different cases. I've practiced in lots of different areas of the law. This is the one area that I get to do well and do good and actually know that I've made a change. I mean, we've represented, my youngest client right now is 6. My oldest client historically was 81. We settled her case, thankfully, so that she felt like she got some sort of justice before whatever will be her natural end. And she was so grateful that people listened to her and that we gave her an opportunity to speak. I thought her deposition was one of the hardest things I've sat through. And when we walked out, she hugged me and said, "Someone finally listened. You made them listen to me." And I thought, I guess I did, right? I mean, because she had told people at the time it was happening. She told her parents. They didn't do anything to help her. She ended up running away from home, and it was a long, convoluted story, but she needed a revival window, because by the time she had amassed enough money and courage to come forward, her statute of limitations ran. So she lived with that, the shame, the guilt, the fear. She was afraid her abuser was going to find her for years. She legally changed her name because she was hiding from him. And when the first Child Victims Act window was passed in New York, she was able to come forward and file her lawsuit. So it was never really about the financial recovery for her. She got a settlement, but it was not about that. She wanted someone to listen to her.
She wanted to tell her story, and you're one of the best storytellers I've ever heard. So Hillary, you mentioned about revival, look back windows, those kind of things. What does that mean? Just for someone, if they haven't heard of that term before, and what are some areas, you mentioned New York as well, like what are some areas in the country, I know it's not absolute, but that are interesting for that, where you can represent survivors in a greater aspect?
So this is my moment to shout out the Epstein survivors and say thank you, because between them and the Me Too movement, right, about 6.5 years ago, we finally started to see a movement across the country to extend or, look back on the statute of limitations. And so New York, I think, took them about 20 years to do it. Maybe I'm overstating it a little bit. Maybe it's a little less than that. But the legislature passed the Child Victims Act window, and it had 2 prongs, right? What it did was extend the prospective statute of limitations for current kids. So they have until they're 55 to bring a lawsuit, which was a huge deal. And lots of times in states when you're suing municipalities, there's a presentment issue. New York had that where you needed to file a notice of claim. The statute actually eliminated the notice of claim requirement for cases of sexual abuse against municipalities, which was wonderful. It also created a look-back window for a year where all of the prerequisites to suit were excused. If your claim had been thrown out because of a statute of limitations defense and dismissed, you could bring it. If you had never brought your claim, you could finally bring it. It opened up the floodgates. Over 11,000 claims were filed in the state of New York. And I will tell you, it did not in any way scratch the surface, right? This was during COVID, so the statute was not very well advertised. Lots of folks had trouble finding lawyers because law firms were closed, just like the courts were, right? We were all living in, I don't even know what kind of times they were. I don't want to revisit that. It will trigger my own personal trauma.
The dark times, yeah.
The dark times, exactly. When no one could dye your hair and you couldn't get out of the house and it was fun. And you were like, oh, well, either we're going to stay married or we're getting divorced, one of those things. But for people looking for litigators, good luck, right? I mean, it was a crazy, crazy time, especially in New York. And so at the time, Governor Cuomo extended the statute of limitations in that window for another year. So what was supposed to be a 1-year window became a 2-year window for filing. There are still whole populations of people in and around New York that just had no access, right? So they could have been people who were New York residents at the time that they were abused, still New York residents that weren't allowed to bring claims, but they were still barred. So there is a series of bills still pending right now trying to open up another permanent window, remove the SOL completely. But New York City did something really, really extraordinary. They passed an ordinance under the Gender Motivated Act that they had already. They extended it and made it a revival. So there is currently a 1-year window. It's open until July of 2027, so that if you were sexually abused in New York City, so New York City and the surrounding boroughs, so the Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, Staten Island, I always forget about that one, you can bring your claim. Right? And it is an awesome thing because it really gives survivors in the most densely populated part of our state the ability to go forward until the state legislature, kind of picks it up and in my opinion, extends what they need to extend. But New York was one of those states. California followed. They had a good revival window, and they have a prospective SOL that's out there too. That's great. I think you have until you're 40 to bring those claims now without signing a certificate of merit. Where in those cases, there's lots of states that have been proposed, these windows have been proposed. The bills haven't been passed. So right now there's a movement in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in Maine. Colorado, we're really pushing for one, but they need a constitutional amendment. So if anyone watching is out in Colorado, write to your representatives because we need your help. But I'm lucky. I'm involved in a lot of different charities and organizations that lobby for these things. So I'm the vice president of the board of Child USA. Child USA has been behind the statute of limitations reform across this country for 10 years. And so we're pushing on. There are federal bills being proposed right now. I think the one that's up that I just read is Virginia's law. It's based on Virginia Giuffre, the Epstein survivor, who is now notorious for opening up the floodgates of lawsuits there. This is the wave, right? I mean, and it's backed by science. I mean, there is definite statistical proof that people just don't come forward when they're kids. They just don't. So when defense counsel, asks those questions to my client, well, why didn't you tell? I laugh, right? And I've literally laughed at depositions and they're like yelling at me, like, counsel, behave. But I've also, right, prepared my clients for the question, and they know. And I'm like, it doesn't matter what your answer is. Just be honest. Right? Were you scared? Were you intimidated? Were you afraid? Did you not even understand? Did you try to tell and no one didn't believe you? I mean, and that happens, right? I mean, I can't tell you how many times we've done I just did one 2 weeks ago where my client described her abuse and said, I told my social worker. She took me to the hospital because at 6 years old, she had an STD. They treated her for it and then put her back into that foster home. So, I mean, this is a prevalent issue, and I make little jokes because if you don't, you'll cry every day. But it's a really serious thing, and I think that it's very hard, in my world at least, to meet a person who hasn't had this experience or know someone who has. And so, I'm lucky that I get to co-counsel with people across the country and meet their clients and kind of go state to state and learn about it, because laws are a little nuanced, as we all know, from state to state, but the truth is the underlying principle is always the same. And if you're fighting for what's right, you're fighting for what's right. Sometimes we need to get lobbyists behind us to help us pass a window to give thousands of people justice. Sometimes we just need one person to file that lawsuit. So, it's just about the timing, I think, and like where you are in the movement.
Yeah. And so you mentioned just now something that was very interesting, because I've had a lot of people inquire, not just for the individuals who are looking to speak with you or listen to you speak in the webinar on April 8th, but individuals who are like, hey, I'm not licensed in New York. I'm not licensed in California. How do I work with AWK Survivor Advocate Attorneys? How do I work with anyone in those areas? Well, so is there anything that you can talk about? Like if you were trying to get involved? Yeah.
Our firm has, oh gosh, I can't keep up with the amount of bar admissions we have. Seriously, and I say that kind of jokingly, but it was one of the reasons why I joined this firm, right? And why we created this particular entity. It's because this is a problem everywhere. And so we're lucky because we have really talented lawyers that are associated with our network that are and by network, they're, my sister firm, and I reach out when I need them. And we get pro-hawked in. So we've got 10 lawyers now that specialize in sexual assault, exploitation, and we're growing. I'm hiring, so if you need a job, feel free, call me. We're interviewing. But what we are doing right now is associating with people who are in other states who have clients who are great litigators, right? And they know their state system, and they know the judges, and they know the defense attorneys that are local, but what they don't know is the subject matter expertise, and that's where we come in. So we've been working with people co-counseling in states everywhere. I just actually, before we got on our little chat here, was talking to a friend in Texas, right, who has a couple of cases that she needed guidance, and she has a great rapport with her clients, but she's like, this is above my head, right? I don't do this, I do this. And I'm like, that's okay, you know how to litigate, let me help you, right? So that's where we come in, and we've been really lucky to work with some awesome people, and I think that as we're seeing the way that kids are abused change, right, with just technology. I mean, like, look, institutions are not just churches and schools. Sometimes they're social media platforms, right? And we're in all of that stuff too. So I guess the message is, if you know someone that's been sexually assaulted in any context, whether they're an adult or a child, call us. We've got novel theories that we're trying. I'm going to file something soon that I can't really tip you off on, but I'm going to tell you. It's going to be, I think, the first of its kind, and I'm really excited about it because we're just taking what happened to our client and putting it together in a different light, right? I mean, we have to be creative to fight for survivors, because as we're getting better at this and we're seeing huge jury verdicts, these institutions are figuring out new defenses, right? And they're lobbying too. We're lobbying to change the law so that our clients can move forward and get their day in court and have access to justice. And they're lobbying to shut us down. So it's always about money, unfortunately. And you have to have that conversation with survivors, but hopefully we tell them it straight so that they understand when we're saying it, it's because we need the money to support, right? Access to justice. And so by working with firms across the board who have great reputations, we're able to open those doors and meet other people in their states and help push the movement.
Yeah. And so you're raising awareness, and a lot of these conversations are, law firms who are looking to put their bar card to use, into a good use. They'd be able to potentially work with you and collaborate pretty much across the country. So if you have an opportunity in somewhere that they are not completely licensed in, or they don't have a bar admission to, they could potentially use you as co-counsel because you have that infrastructure, you have that team of 40 or so people and 10 lawyers and the AWK network in general. And it's just an incredible infrastructure that allows you to, it avails you the ability to fight back against these powerful institutions, right? And it could be as small as a foster care and as large as you go against prisons, you go against
Yep.
universities. Yeah.
Name an institution, and I'm not kidding. I'm not saying it to be funny about it. I mean, I did a little bit of a stock. I just took stock of what I had, and I was looking at it going, wow, right? I mean, so right now, currently, just not naming specific institutions, but giving you types. We've got juvenile justice facilities. We've got adult prisons. We've got social media companies, dating platforms. We've got schools, hospitals, workplaces, random workplaces. I'm actually going to go to a mediation in 3 weeks, which it's a giant case. There's been 25 women that were assaulted by a business owner. It's a construction company, right? I mean, exactly. So the thing that I sort of say that's very general is, you show me someone who's been sexually assaulted, and I will rack my brain to figure out a way to hold everybody who could potentially have liability accountable. I mean, yes, of course you can sue abusers, right? And we should when we can. But when you're taking it from a trauma-informed perspective, you have to really be honest with your client. I mean, I did one of these in New York early on in the Child Victims Act window. My client was one of the main lobbyists who had gotten the window passed, and no one would take his case. And, I looked at it. He had been sexually abused by an orderly in a hospital. So when he was a child, he went to go visit his dad who had had surgery. And this orderly was a prolific pedophile. He had abused, I think in total, he was eventually arrested, but I think he had abused in total something like 60 kids. He's still in jail right now, and he's still applying for parole, right? And my client just couldn't find a lawyer. So he sees the guy is like, oh, I'll show you a tour of the hospital, and his mother let him go. And he gets walked around the hospital, and they take him he gets taken up to the roof, where the pedophile hangs him by his feet over the roof and says, if you don't touch me the way I'm telling you to, I'll drop you. And he's abused on the roof. And it was this one-time incident, and I mean, it forever changed this man's life. And no one would take his case. And the reason was, there was a question about, a bankruptcy of the entity, right? And we dug deep, and we found there was a potential successor liability issue. We found a corporation that was still open in a bankruptcy from 1971, I think. I might be lying about the year. I might be lying about the year right now. This was 5 years ago. But it was really before the U.S. trustee system came into the bankruptcy world. We couldn't even find a trustee. We had to go back and find handwritten records from the bankruptcy court, right? So it's like the old movies you see when people are doing doc review in a closet someplace in Kentucky, because that's the record room, right? That's what it was like. And we find this entity, we serve them, nobody showed up. We got him a $4 million default judgment. Will he ever collect anything on it? Probably not. But I wasn't going to give up, and we fought for him. And it was worth it for him, right? I mean, but it also taught me a lot about counseling clients. And he had a very real perspective. He knew. And we were in it with him for the long haul. But the point I'm making is, we dug to find those institutions, right? And just because there was so much uncertainty, I'm like, well, if we can collect, we can collect. We'll just keep going. I think now, just because the Child Victims Act window has, both in New York and California, has taught us, and I mean the plaintiff's bar, so much about how to litigate these cases and what's really viable and what's not. We have a better feel of insurance policies and what they were like at that time. And, I wasn't even alive at the time that this was going on. So for me, I'm well, I know what the insurance policies look like now. Let's see how this goes. I mean, there are insurance archivists that you have to hire sometimes to find these things. So, I guess it's just being relentless, but also
Yeah.
making sure that the client knows, right? There's a likelihood we might not be able to go against your individual abuser. But who else helped that person? Who else hid that person, right? Do they have a policy we can get at? Because if they do, like, you might be able to afford that therapy that you have been dying to go to. I mean, there was one case in particular that I think personally changed my life, and I'm so close with this client. I started representing her when she was 8. She is just turning 17 now. Her case is over. She's applying to colleges. I just wrote her a letter of rec, because now she wants to go into victims' rights and be an attorney and do this. And one of the things that we were talking about is, like, how do you know, right, when you've done something for the client that's, like, both, like, the moral right thing, right, and the financial right thing. And what she said to me is that I was very honest with her about what the process would be like, and she's happy, right, that we went the direction that we went, because it stopped at a certain point, right? And for her, all she wanted was money to be able to do equine therapy, because she needed to be with a horse and her insurance wouldn't cover it. Her parents didn't have the money to pay for it. And so, with what came from her settlement, she got the treatment she needed. She's doing much better. She's applying to colleges that I don't think she would have been able to afford without having what she has now in a structure. So, there's little wins, because tomorrow there's a new abuse case. So you have to kind of
Unfortunately. Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, you're leaving no stone unturned. That's the only thing I can think about. And you're
trying.
relentless, like, in your approach, and your team is tenacious to make sure they fight really hard. It's a real war. It's a battle.
Yeah, and I'm lucky that I'm in the trenches with people who feel the same way, right?
Yeah.
And that is, like, definitely something that I think our whole network prides themselves on, right? I mean, we're fighting for whoever we represent in whatever battle every day, and it's nice when you're a whole firm like that. Because you have backup when you need it, right? And even just for us, right? We do all this stuff with vicarious trauma because it is really hard to listen to this all day long, and so our whole team is just prepared for it, and we support each other, and then we're able to better support the clients.
100%. And then, so you have a webinar coming up April 8th. What are some of the things that people can expect if they wanted to sign up for it? What are some of the topics that might be useful for them to hear about? How do they get started? What are you going to discuss?
We're going to talk about the active cases that I'm pursuing in different states, and the types of entities that we're looking for, causes of action that really do exist, but the ones that you should also pursue, because, like I said, I've learned a lot by trying to go after everyone and everything, and there are some things I think that just make more sense both for your client in terms of making sure they're getting the best result financially, and also protecting, right, their emotional space as much as you can, and also making it advantageous for the law firms that are doing the work, because these are costly litigations. So, there's a lot about that we'll talk about. We'll talk about how we do things trauma-informed and why that's so important. I kind of touched on a little bit, but there's lots more to talk about. And I think that, we'll talk about the different types of institutions and which states are, like, really where you want to be right now, which states have windows coming.
There's a reason you're a lead attorney at AWK Survivor Advocate Attorneys. You're an incredible, incredible person. Just a human in general,
yeah.
and I'm thankful that you're on the good
But
side.
I think you're giving me too much credit, but I appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me. Anytime anyone wants to talk about this, my heart gets lit on fire, and I'm like, ooh, do I shut up now? So thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. And then, so people can sign up for this webinar, and if they wanted to attend, very welcome to attend. It's going to be live. And so they can ask questions throughout, and we'll make sure that we have time set aside where Hillary can answer any and all questions that are asked. And then also, if you want to sign up just to get a recording afterwards and review it, you can do so at webinar.demandlane.com. There will be somewhere in this field a link to sign up. And then also, one more thing. If they don't want to wait until April 8th, is there a way, or what's the best way to contact your firm?
Call us.
Call.
Email us, whatever you need. We're here. We have an intake team that answers our phone much more than I do at this point. But if you need to speak with me specifically, they will flag it, and I'm happy to make an appointment and talk to anyone who has questions about any of this. And I say that even if we don't end up working together. It's so important in this space to make good and consistent law from state to state, because what happens in Michigan affects Maryland, affects Florida, affects New York, and we see those arguments in California. So always happy to just be a resource for people in this space.
It's amazing. So worst case scenario, you have Hillary in your back pocket to ask questions and see, is this a good idea? Is this something my firm can get involved in? And you'll give some guidance based on your experience. So that's wonderful. I super appreciate you coming on and talking about institutional sex abuse. It's something that's close to home, something that a lot of law firms are really looking into right now, as seeing as if it's a good part of their practice and how they can incorporate it in helping out survivors of abuse, helping them heal, and also hold the institutions accountable. Like you said, these people will keep doing it until you hit their pocketbooks. So it's important to impact change and to help future generations not be subject to the same kind of trauma and heinous acts, horrible things. And so you're fighting against the worst of human nature. So I appreciate you and everything you do, sincerely. Thank you so much, Hillary.
Thank you so much for highlighting it.
Thank you for coming on. And guys, thank you for watching. Definitely sign up for this webinar, April 8th, and we'll see you there. Thank you so much.